I wanted to welcome everyone to this presentation on the California Propositions by the League of Women's Voters. It's co-sponsored by the Civic Engagement Club and the Global Studies Club. I'm Hal, and I'm part of the Global Studies Club. We are a group of students who present and discuss different topics concerning the state of the world, but also try to find ways to get active in changing those circumstances that the world finds itself in today. The many propositions in elections this time around in November are kind of confusing to the people in California, which is why we're happy to have the League of Women's Voters to explain this. There are really important things on the ballot that affect our lives directly, so it's necessary to give people this information so that they can make informed choices. Hopefully we'll have some time after the presentation for questions and comments to further clarify things for everyone. Of course, the maximum amount of time you spend voting is 15 minutes, maybe. What's more important is what we do with the rest of our time. One of the things that the people at Global Studies Club are involved in is the Group Against Cuts, which works to inform and get people active in fighting the cuts to public services. We have a booth outside with more information. If you want to get involved in Global Studies Club, we aren't meeting this week, but we meet regularly on Wednesdays during lunch hour from 12:15 to 1:15 in room 216. We also are starting to meet on Tuesdays during the same time and in the same place starting next week. Both clubs are also working on doing this phone bank thing in support of Prop 30, which League of Women Voters will explain. If you want some more information, just go outside and talk to people at the booth. But basically, there's going to be foods, phones. We're going to call people and ask them to get out and vote on Prop 30. So thank you. Without further ado, here's Tamara, who's going to present the Civic Engagement Club and the League of Women's Voters.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Tamara Hansen. I'm the president of the Civic Engagement Club here at Berkeley City College. We are a nonpartisan club that educates our fellow students and the community on issues that we find important, and then we find ways to advocate for those issues. We meet every Tuesday in room 53 from 12:15 to 1:15, so during college hour. Without further ado, we have the panel from the League of Women's Voters who are here to volunteer their time and explain to us some of the major propositions on the California ballot this year. We have Nancy Bickle, Diz Swift, and Bill Chapman here to explain to us these propositions. Also, during the presentation, Ethan will be here with a microphone. There will be momentary pauses for questions, and so, yeah, here you go.
Hi, everyone. Let me just get us back to our place. So these are the measures we're going to be discussing. I'm Nancy Bickle from the League of Women Voters. When you think of women, think of the fact that it's got W-O and M-E-N, because we have women and men members, and we have members of all ages. So you're always welcome to come to our meetings or to join us. So the first two measures we're going to be discussing are the tax measures, and I'm going to put us up on 30. And the way this is going to work, can everybody hear me all right? Not really? All right, am I now able to be heard? All right, and we'll be passing this mic around, so raise your hand if you have trouble hearing any of us. So the question on Prop 30, it's temporary taxes to fund education, guaranteed local public safety funding. It's an initiative constitutional amendment. Prop 30 and Prop 38, which we'll be talking about next, are kind of paired measures because they're two competing ways of trying to fill the budget gap that we have had again and again in the state budget. Prop 30 is the measure that you have probably heard described as the governor's measure, or the one that the governor and the legislature collaborated on. So the question that you're asked to answer for Prop 30 is, should we amend the California Constitution to increase sales taxes by 1/4 cent for 4 years and increase personal income tax rates for people who are well off, people who are earning more than $250,000, and that would continue for 7 years. And it would guarantee that the funding would go to K-12 schools, to community colleges like BCC, and to local police and fire services. So there's about 6 million that this is expected to yield each year. 6 billion, I beg your pardon, a big difference. 6 billion, and if this measure, Prop 30, does not pass, then there are automatic cuts set up in the current budget, because the current budget of the state was written in the expectation that this would pass. So now I'm going to hand it over to Diz, who is going to talk about the arguments that the supporters are offering.
Thank you for coming. I'm glad to see so many folks here. This Proposition 30 will put priorities back on schools and universities. In the last 4 years alone, there have been 20 billion with a B cuts. If this does not pass, there will be $6 billion cut from primarily schools, colleges, and universities. Nearly all of it will come from that. So we need to get this passed to prevent those cuts and put our priorities back on the schools. The tax measure that it will use to build the revenues that we're talking about for the $6 billion are temporary, as you see on the slide up above. Do you want to move to the next slide? As it says there, it's for folks that earn $250,000 a year or more. So if you are 2 people, a couple, that's $500,000 a year or more, and it's temporary. It's only for 7 years. 1/4% or 1/4 cent on the dollar sales tax only for 4 years. So this is temporary. It's not in perpetuity. Once you get a tax, you can't take it back. Not so. There is a horizon on this. In 2011, a lot of responsibilities, including safety programs like police and fire, were transferred to local governments, but without a way to pay for them. This provides that funding to local communities, primarily counties, for the police and fire support. So that's what it's talking about, that it will, for local and police and fire services. So we'll get that with funding as well. And you can't spend it except as described. There are tough fiscal controls. Money goes into a special account that the legislature cannot touch. It can't be used for state bureaucracy. It can only be used as described. There are mandatory independent annual audits that ensure that the funds are only spent on schools and public safety, and it authorizes criminal prosecution if the money is misused. So the support for Proposition 30 is to put the priorities back on schools and colleges and universities.
Okay, now we'll go on to the con argument.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming as well. The opponents of Prop 30 have really a very simple argument, or 2 very simple arguments. The first is that Prop 30 is a shell game. There are no assurances that tax increases will actually benefit classrooms. While it's true that the current state budget has been adopted with the expectation that this will pass and that there are trigger cuts in the current state budget, we have some idea that of where those cuts will be. However, as this money, this new tax money is to go into the general fund, there really are no guarantees that general fund money has to be spent in ways that the proponents say it will. The future legislature could change the allocation of the money. So there really is no absolute guarantee, and if they say that there is, you can't believe them. Politicians and special interests want to continue their out-of-control spending but not make meaningful reforms, and that's what opponents believe about Prop 30, that it's being sold to you as one thing, but there really is no guarantee, because it's general fund money, that will actually be spent the way they say it will be, because a future legislature could change the general fund allocations.
Okay, so now we'll turn to Prop 38, which is kind of the competing measure, and this takes it's also a temporary measure, but a longer period. It would apply from 2013 to 2024. And the question will be, should we increase personal income tax rates? So this will only be personal income tax for everyone except people with the lowest incomes to provide funds for public schools, early childhood education programs, and state debt payments. So in other words, everybody but all people who pay income taxes, all but the lowest tax bracket, would pay more on their taxes, and the tax size of the additional tax would increase as the income increases. So that, I think, is the main outline of this measure. And the first few years, it is guaranteed to go 60% to K-12 and 10% to preschool programs. Community colleges are not included specifically in this measure, and 30% to pay off debt. So this is public schools, early childhood education, and state debt payments only. The proportions would change as the years of the tax applying went on. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Diz to talk about what the supporters say.
Proposition 38 makes our K through 12 schools and early childhood a priority. It guarantees as much as $10 billion in funding, and nearly all of it will go through K through 12 and early childhood programs. The K through 12 funds are school specific, allocated on a per pupil basis. They will be subject to local control, audits, and to public input. The school sites can use the money based on different needs at different schools, so it's local people decide. And it prohibits the state from directing new funds. The tax share is equitable. Except for the lowest income, everybody participates in the program. On a sliding scale from about 0.4% increase to 2.2% increase for folks earning over $2.5 million. So their total tax, now their rate is 9.3, total tax would then be 11.5. So it's across the board, everybody pays, everybody benefits. It also pays down the state debt. We are absolutely in need of getting that debt down. It's crippling. In the first 4 years, 30% of the revenues, so over $3 billion, will be used toward repaying that state debt. There are strict controls on how the money is spent. It prohibits the legislator.
Thank you, Diz. All right, now we will hear what the opponents say.
Okay, the opponents of Prop 38 say that taxpayers will be locked into higher rates until 2024, and there's virtually no accountability to how the money is spent. It's essentially a block grant. The state gives a certain amount of money to each school district, and they can spend it any way they want. Some school districts may spend it in ways you and I would want. Other school districts may not, but we have no say in that matter. We also have no say as to whether the money will be used to improve school performance or get rid of bad teachers. So maybe we have really failing school districts, and we're just going to fund them in their increasingly failing ways. No controls on that. So if that's what you want, then you should vote for Prop 38. If you don't want that, then you should vote against it.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn this mic over to Athen, and you're going to have about 5 minutes to ask your questions very efficiently and briefly. And we'll try and answer them.
Let me say one more thing first before we start the questions. And that is, since these are competing measures, it's important to realize that if they both pass and there are conflicting parts of both, that the measure that got the most yes votes would prevail. And in cases where they don't compete, if they both pass, then the parts that don't compete would both go into effect.
Okay, questions?
Just raise your hand if you have any questions, and I'll walk to you.
So are you saying that Prop 38 makes only lower education a priority? And if I vote yes on Prop 38 and yes on Prop 30, but the majority does not, that higher education could be cut from the budget?
Yes, Prop 38 applies only to K-12 education. It provides no money for colleges or universities in the state. So if it passes and Prop 30 doesn't, the money that's raised will go to K-12 education. It won't go to Berkeley City College, Peralta District, University of California, or the California State University system.
Yeah, so my question is about Prop 30. Well, a couple things. One, with the opponents, it seems as if you have two sorts of opponents. It's not as if in your red column of opponents, the two bullet points have anything in common. The people who are saying that this proposition may or may not actually guarantee funds, that's a legitimate concern. And I was wondering, why did it have to be a constitutional amendment? I was just wondering, is it because it's a sales tax, or what about it made it require a constitutional amendment, if you guys know that?
Why don't we go on to another question? I'll see if I can look it up. So, is there another question? We'll try and answer that. If there's any other questions on this measure.
Actually, I can answer the first part of your question. I think actually the two bullet points on the con side of Prop 30 are actually related. They both express a distrust of government. And the people that oppose it are essentially the ones who oppose tax raises because they believe the government can't handle tax money and they want to take taxing power away from government. And especially not give it any more.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to quickly find the answers to why one is an initiative and one a constitutional amendment. So you or I will have to do more research on that. Any other questions? Oh,
yeah. On Prop 38, I was wondering if they had any idea of how much monetary value it's actually going to raise.
The annual estimate is about $10 billion in revenue, and it will be split differently over the period. It's for 12 years. And so at first it's 60% for schools. I think it's, what is it, 30, what is the numbers? You have them?
Yes, it's 60 to K-12,
10 to the childhood programs, and 30% to the debt. And that will be for 4 years only. And after that, it's 85% to schools and 15% to childhood programs. The key difference between these two measures, 30 is for K through 12 and colleges, universities. 38 is only K through 12 and early childhood programs. And it also pays back the debt and guarantees some local funding. No, that's 30, is guarantees local funding, sorry. The other major difference is that 30 is taxing only folks that earn over $250,000. It's for 7 years and has a 1/4% sales tax for 4 years, whereas 38 is 12 years and it's across the board tax.
Across the board income tax. Sales tax applies to everybody who buys anything in California.
And it's personal income tax, not corporate tax.
Okie doke. We are going to go on to the next item. So, Prop 32. Now, Prop 32 forbids automatic political contributions by payroll deduction. It's an initiative statute. And the question you're being asked to answer is, should unions, corporations, government contractors, and state and local government employers be prohibited from using payroll deducted funds, or in some instances their own funds, for political expenditures? Now, here's where all these good critical thinking and analysis skills that you've been learning all these years come into play. Who uses payroll deductions to fund political campaigns? Anybody have an answer? Unions, that's right. So this is a measure which appears to be even-handed, but is actually strongly arranged to affect unions much more than all the other organizations that it covers. It has rather complicated, detailed provisions, but that's the most important thing you should remember about this measure. So if you think that union money should not be spent in political campaigns, you would vote yes. If you disagree, you would vote no. And on to the people who support this.
Proposition 32 will put an end to corporate and union contributions to California politicians, period. No exceptions. It goes as far as the U.S. Constitution allows to end the special interest influence in state government. Right now, both unions and corporations fund independent political committees protected by the U.S. Constitution in PACs, and that cannot be banned. So that's a constitutional requirement. We cannot ban that. It bans payroll deductions to finance spending for any political purposes. So it prohibits unions, corporations, government contractors, and state and local government employers from spending money deducted from an employee's paycheck for what they call political purposes. It stops contractors from giving to politicians who approve their contracts. Right now that's allowed. And it levels the field for small businesses. Today it's legal for politicians to give contracts to political donors, which can shut out small businesses in the process that are not able to fund the politicians. Prop 32 will end this special treatment and stop the waste that causes.
The opponents of Prop 32 say that 99% of California corporations don't use payroll deductions for political contributions, so Prop 32 would only affect unions. They also say that business super PACs and independent expenditure committees are exempt from Prop 32's controls. I actually heard a debate this morning on this measure on KQED. Some of you may have heard it a couple of hours ago. And it was quite interesting. The debate really seemed to be between the two sides on what exactly were political contributions. The pro side seemed to be arguing that it was just campaigns. But corporations don't really actually spend much money on campaigns. They do spend a lot of money on funding PACs and on funding initiatives and other things. That would not be covered at all under Prop 32. So essentially it's a measure that if passed would force the unions to unilaterally disarm.
Okay, we're not going to take questions on this measure. We're going to do them in pairs just because it'll move us along a little faster, even though the second one is not connected to the first. So the next question we're going to look at is Prop 37, which is labeling genetically engineered foods, which you probably also know as GMO foods, genetically modified foods. And the question is, should we require labels on foods sold in California that have genetically modified ingredients, GE foods? Labels would be put on raw, on processed, on plant and animal foods. There would be an exception for restaurants and I think another couple of small exceptions. And now we're going to hear what supporters of this measure have to say and a little bit more about the details.
You have a right to know what is in your food. If it's genetically engineered, you have a right to know. Proposition 37 gives you that. Because genetically engineered foods are controversial, over 40 countries around the world require labels for them, including most of Europe, Japan, and even China and India, and we can do the same. There are no long-term health studies that have proven that genetically engineered food is safe for humans. Also, no genetically modified food can be labeled natural. So when you see natural, you'll know that it's more natural. And it's a simple common sense measure. It doesn't cost anything to include information on a label, and it will be phased in, giving manufacturers time to adjust.
The opponents of Prop 37 say that the regulation would require extra monitoring of foods and would open the door to frivolous lawsuits, therefore requiring a lot of additional spending on the part of companies to defend them and higher food prices. And that food producers unwilling or unable to modify their packaging would be forced to switch to higher priced, non-genetically modified ingredients, potentially making food more expensive as well. And one additional thing, the initiative requires only that a label be placed on foods that contain genetically engineered ingredients that simply says this product contains genetically engineered or genetically modified organisms. It doesn't tell you anything about what those are. So you really don't get much information at all. It's estimated right now that about 70 to 80% of all foods sold in supermarkets and grocery stores, all processed foods, contain genetically modified ingredients. So essentially everything that you see will be labeled genetically modified, but you won't have any way of telling whether that means that it's harmful or not. The proponents, I think, probably want to see the genetically modified foods banned and hope that there'll be a huge outcry and that will be the result of this, because there really is very little information you'll get.
Okay, so now it's over to you. You get to ask questions about these two measures.
Thanks a lot. On Prop 37, would it apply to mom and pop food producers and also smaller scale food producers?
It applies to all producers, all food, small farmers, small groceries, big groceries.
Okay, thanks.
And organic producers as well, which is where the labeling requirements are probably going to be the most onerous. Although organic producers would probably not have, you wouldn't think that they would have genetically modified ingredients, but once genetically modified things are in the field, organic farmers frequently have a hard time keeping genetically modified seeds from out of their fields. And there are situations where organic farmers have seed blown in and produce genetically modified crops without even knowing it.
On Prop 32, I heard that the measure will stop special treatment for unions and corporations. Was that pro or con? I didn't get that.
It stops payroll deductions for anyone, and it ends corporate and union contributions directly to politicians or to any political committee that is used directly for a ballot measure.
I think in effect it applies only to unions.
I had a question with Prop 37. Prop 37.
I can't quite hear you. Speak up. Closer to the mic.
I was wondering if Prop 37 it'll also include will it also include the smaller. I think someone else already asked this. The smaller farms here in California?
It affects anyone who sells food in California for product consumption, not restaurants, but otherwise in the grocery store or at the farmer's market.
I think the only exception is that if you feed genetically modified ingredients to cattle or pigs or chickens, you don't have to label the meat that results from them as genetically modified. It's only if it's a processed food that contains genetically modified ingredients. So if you feed it to a cow and the cow is then slaughtered, the cow meat that you buy in the supermarket doesn't have to be labeled.
Any more questions? Oh, there's one more question back there.
I think.
Well, we should wrap this up, so maybe two more questions.
I was wondering if you knew who was funding Prop 32, because usually there's always some secret money coming from somewhere, and I don't understand why I haven't been hearing or seeing more commercials from unions saying how bad this is.
Actually, whenever I turn on commercial television, almost all of the ads are against Prop 32, and those are funded by unions. There was recently a $4 million ad buy made throughout the state in favor of Prop 32, which has been identified as coming from a PAC controlled by one of the Koch brothers.
All right, I think we're getting one more question.
So Prop 37 it only requires anyone that grows food in California. What about out-of-state farmers and growers?
Prop 32 is what you're referring to, the genetically engineered? I mean 37, sorry. You're right. Anything sold in California, so wherever it comes from.
You know, that's actually a good point. I mean, I think that a lot of national producers of foods are opposed to it because they'll then have to create packaging especially for California, which is going to be more expensive for them.
This is why California has so much effect on markets. I mean, that's why when California required putting tailpipe emissions controls on, it very quickly spread across the country because we're such a big market. So it would be very influential. Now we're going to go on to two measures which affect punishment for crimes. And the first one is, I have to change here. The first one is Prop 34. Do you want to end the death penalty? It's an initiative statute. And so the question is, should we end the death penalty and replace it with life imprisonment without the possibility of parole? And should we add some funds to enable police departments to solve more rape and murder cases? The solution rate is relatively low. So for more on this, we'll turn to Diz.
Right now, more than 100 innocent people have been sentenced to death in the United States, and some of those innocent people have been executed. This will prevent that ever happening again. Since the death penalty was enacted in 1978 in California, 900 people have received death sentences, and of those, only 14 have been executed. 83 have died in prison, so they basically stay in prison. It costs a lot of money to have the death penalty cases appealed. They are appealed and often involve extensive challenges in both state and federal courts, and such proceedings can take as long as decades for those appeals. So during that time, we're paying for all that court costs. Repealing the death penalty will save $130 million a year. That's a lot of money. And it keeps them in prison for the rest of their lives with no possibility of parole. It also establishes for the next 4 years a Safe California Fund, which will get $100 million over that 4-year period. Remember, so it's 25 to 30 million a year for 4 years, whereas this will save 130 million a year. So just for 4 years, we're spending money on the Safe California Fund, which is to help solve unsolved murder and rape cases. So it will go to local law enforcement. So it saves money, and it saves innocent people from being put to death.
Thank you, Diz.
The opponents of Prop 34 say that it takes $100 million from the general fund over the next 4 years and will result in many millions more in the future in long-term costs for housing and health care of convicted killers. They also say that Prop 34 lets murderers who commit heinous crimes escape justice. And another point, which is not on the slide, but I think is an important one, is that currently district attorneys in each county have the discretion, along with judges in individual cases, to determine whether or not a defendant will face a third strike conviction.
Yeah, but that's 3 strikes.
Oh, you're right. Sorry.
We're not there yet, but we're almost there.
I'm one ahead.
We're almost
Sorry,
there.
that's right. Okay, sorry.
Okay. So is that it, Bill?
That's it.
Okay. So we're going to go on to the next measure, the 3 strikes, and then we'll have a brief period of questions, and then we'll, not long after that, we'll wrap up so everybody has time to get where they're going. So Prop 36, the 3 strikes law. Now, if you remember, the 3 strikes law was passed some years ago. And as is the case with most laws and initiative statutes passed by the people, it did not allow for any changes by the legislature. So any problems that arise have to come back to the voters for solution. And this is a case of that, I would say. So in the existing statute, if you committed armed robbery, let's say, twice, and so your third strike was smoking a joint, you would still go to life imprisonment. There are relatively few people who are in that situation. I think 300? About 300 are in prison because of that kind of, but because prosecutors began to modify when they would invoke the 3 strikes law to make it more equitable. But this would change the law to, in the following way. If the third conviction was not for a serious or violent felony, then you would just double the usual sentence for that crime. If, however, the previous first or second or both crimes had been serious or violent, rape, murder, serious assault, that sort of thing, and the third crime was even if the third crime was not too serious, they could still be sentenced to life, depending on what the prosecutor decided to do. And under this measure, people already sentenced, as I described, these 300 people would have the right to apply for their sentences to be reduced. So let us hear some more about what supporters have to say.
Proposition 36 makes the punishment fit the crime. If you don't have a violent or serious felony offense on the third strike, you get double the sentence, but you don't go necessarily required to be life, 25 years to life. It won't let dangerous felons out, because if the first or second was a strike, was a violent or serious felony, they stay in prison. It will move people out that have not committed serious or violent felonies and help the overcrowding of our prisons so we can have room to put the really bad guys in and keep those violent felons off the street. There's significant savings. Savings are estimated from 70 to 90 million annually over the next 20 years or so, because fewer people will be incarcerated for life. And interestingly, there is significant savings from a reduced need for medical care for elderly inmates.
Okay, over to the opponents.
The opponents of Prop 36 say that it would allow the release from prison of dangerous repeat criminals sentenced to life terms without parole or any supervision. Also, that the 3 strikes law has reduced the state's crime rate and prevented criminals from being recycled through our courts over and over again, thereby saving money. And now for the third point, which is that currently district attorneys in different counties throughout the state, in connection with judges in various criminal trials, have the discretion to decide whether to prosecute a third strike as a felony or not. I mean, whether the third crime is a felony or not, or as a third. No, as a it's it's confusing. The third, whether the third crime is going to be considered a third strike or not. This would take that discretion away from them and make it so that only those felonies listed on the list of serious crimes could be considered third strikes.
Okay, so now there are about 5 minutes for your questions, and
yeah, just a quick question. Would on those list of felonies or whatever, would those have to be considered the third strike, or would the prosecutor still?
It's my understanding, yes, that they would. There would be no discretion anymore. On the other hand, right now it's possible for somebody to commit a crime, say in Alameda County, and be convicted of a third strike, whereas if he or she had committed that crime in San Francisco County, they wouldn't be convicted of a third strike. So some person could be convicted of the identical crime, and in one county would go to jail for life, and another county wouldn't.
It's my understanding that it's the prosecution's choice what they charge the defendant with. So the prosecution has leeway on the charge.
Well, it's the prosecution and the judge that they decide together. And right now, there are the district attorneys in Los Angeles County and San Francisco County, which are the two largest counties in the state, I believe, at least well, maybe Alameda County. But I know that the district attorneys in San Francisco and Los Angeles are opposed to Prop 36. I mean, they support Prop 36. I'm sorry.
So the third strike would be invoked regardless of the quality of the previous two crimes. So if the previous two had been nonviolent, the serious language in there is a little.
The previous two have to be serious or felonies, or serious felonies.
The judge and prosecution currently have the leeway to say if it's a strike conviction.
On the third strike. And well, they also, I guess,
on all strikes.
They also can decide, I think, right now, whether or not to use the two previous strikes.
And what this would do is change that. If the two previous strikes are a violent or a serious crime, no matter what the third one was, you're in for 25 years to life.
No, that's not true.
That's correct.
It would change it so that it would the third one would have to be serious or violent as well. I'm pretty sure.
I was looking for a little clarification on Prop 34, the actual how much, I mean, what is the cost between, you know, actually keeping them in prison for life and, you know, going through all that extra court fees and stuff of appealing over and over and over again, which is going to be more cost-friendly in the long run, or are they equally expensive?
The estimate that is quoted in the measure is $130 million savings, because primarily, of course, and prison costs and the additional cost for security for death row inmates. They need to be handcuffed and accompanied by 2 guards if they're ever out of their cell, et cetera, and they're in court for 2 decades at least. So that's the estimate that's listed.
You know, in effect, right now, we have life without parole for most people who are sentenced to life, because in the 20 years that we've had the death penalty, or almost 30 years we've had the death penalty reinstated in California, I think there have been fewer than 20 people executed, but there have been over 80 that have died of natural causes. 83.
Another question on Prop 34 is the appeal rate different for people who are convicted of life without parole versus people who are convicted of the death penalty? Are we sure that people are going to appeal less if they are simply convicted of life without parole? And also, are there any contingencies tied to the increase in funds to solve rape and murder cases? Is there anything in that proposition that allows us to track whether or not those funds actually did increase solving those crimes?
Well, I don't know the answer to the second part, but to the first part, your first part of the question was again? I think that's why I think I heard that the prisoners on death row at San Quentin are actually opposed to this for precisely that reason, is that they feel that while they have life sentences, it gives them a chance to appeal where they wouldn't have the right to appeal, or at least not as easily, and with state funding if they weren't under a life sentence. So I think it must be, yeah.
So I see people are off to their next class or their job or whatever, so we're going to wrap up very, very rapidly. We just wanted to draw to your attention that Prop 40 has remained on the ballot even though the people who put it there no longer are supporting it. So it is a referendum to whether you want to confirm redistricting of the state Senate district seats, which were designed by our new nonpartisan redistricting commission. And so these do need to be reconfirmed if you want to keep those people in place. And the reason why it's still on the ballot is we don't have a mechanism for taking things off the ballot. And there's more of a story to this, but maybe not for now. And the other thing we wanted you to know is where you can get additional information. And there are the websites, but the key things you want to remember are smartvoter.org, easyvoterguide.org, and cavotes.org are the places to look. And of course, there's a wealth of other wonderful resources. We can find out who put money into things. You can find out on fact check and flack check whether the ads for different candidates and measures are telling the truth, and so on and so forth. So we're very delighted that you came today. Thank you for your interest. And if you have not yet registered, please register. Registration closes October 22nd, but the sooner the better, so you won't forget it. And also, when you fill in a registration form, remember to put the date beside your signature. That's the most common mistake. Or use online registration so that you can register online. And we hope to see many of you voting this year, and ask your friends and relatives who aren't registered or need to re-register and tell them you want them to vote. That's much more effective than anybody else speaking to them or urging them to register and vote. Thanks a lot.
Once again, I would just like, once again, on the behalf of the Global Studies Club and the Civic Engagement Club, I'd like to thank our panel for coming out here today and helping us out with this. And thank you guys very much for coming. We really need the support.